So we make these snap decisions based on context.
Which is why you decide on the house you want next quicker than the next pair of jeans you want.
100%.
I love the Goldilocks effect. I'd heard of it before, but it was never called out. It wasn't given that name. I've heard of the strategy before.
Yeah.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I've been training all morning that when people hear it, they're going to use it today, right? My favourite bit of it in being in your book is the fact that you were sort of hoodwinked by it, and you know about these kind of things. So just tell us the story. Tell us what it is by telling us the story of how you best came across an exemplar of it.
Yeah, it goes back to something I said at the beginning, which is we understand the value of things by the context in which we see them. And so our brain is constantly doing this thing called anchoring, where we're trying to use any data point we have to determine the rest of the picture we see. So if you go into an electronics store and you see 3 TVs on the shelf, the brain assumes that the expensive one is very bougie and is very posh. It'll assume that the cheapest one, just because of the context, is going to break probably and is probably not a great TV. And people will, in those studies, typically pick the middle option. It's the same on a menu when you see 3 steaks. You'll think, oh, A5 Wagyu, okay, leave that one out. This one here, this sirloin thing, probably not going to taste great. So they'll go for the middle option just because of the context in which we see it. And when I've just had my offer accepted for a new house here in London, down near Victoria Park, and I was doing loads of viewings with my estate agent, and he was so insistent on showing me 3 properties I had no desire to see at all. And so he showed me the first property, which was clearly on the cheaper end. It was smaller and a little bit cramped. Then he showed me this
more than you thought it would be.
More than I thought it would be, yeah, and a little bit overpriced. He showed me this other property, which was pretty extreme, very, very expensive. Then he showed me this third property, which was kind of in between the two. It had lots more space. It was a little bit more on the expensive end, but on a square foot for cost basis, it offered a lot more. And I obviously made an offer for that property. In hindsight, many months later, when I'm in preparation for this book, and I'm reading about this thing called anchoring, where when we see 3 things, we're actually using the other 2 options to determine the value of any of the options. I sent him a text message and asked him if he knew about this and if estate agents were intentionally showing people properties they didn't want to change the perception of the property that they knew the person did want. So if you know someone wants a property number A, an estate agent should probably show them a property that's the same price but considerably worse. It will trick the mind into thinking that property A is great value, and that's what he did to me. And it's the house I'm about to move into now.
Other examples of that is, I mean, the sleight of hand is usually it's the least expensive is more expensive than it should be. The one that they want you to buy often is the one you should buy is a bit more expensive than the one that's not very good and too expensive. And then the third one is just so stupidly expensive. Mm-hmm. So the gap between the first two is much smaller than the gap between the middle one and the last one. Evinced in airline seats.
Which is every airline. So if you fly economy to business. So economy usually, let's just say on a long haul flight, the ones I'm thinking about to New York, economy might cost you £600-700. Yeah. Business will probably be 2.5 times more than that, around £2,000 ish. Yeah. On an airline. Then first class will be $6,000 to $8,000. Yeah. It's usually about $8,000 if you go to LA. So considerably more expensive. What that then, in comparison, makes you believe is that business is a good option. They have more business seats. And if you look at how airlines make their money, so they don't make money from first class. They make their money from the people taking the business class seats, which is why post-pandemic, a lot of airlines are actually removing the top-end options. They want more people to buy those business class seats. So they use the first class seats. And if you go in Singapore, you literally have an apartment in the air with a shower, purely as an anchor to get you to buy those business class seats. And the study that I talk about in the book as well is an experiment they conducted where they offered people all-inclusive trip to Paris or an all-inclusive trip to Rome. And in that study, people would pick the all-inclusive trip to Paris. But then when they introduced a third option, which was all-inclusive, so the 3 options they now had in the next study were all-inclusive trip to Paris, all-inclusive trip to Rome, or all-inclusive trip to Rome without coffee, people would then choose the all-inclusive trip to Rome. And that's purely because what the brain does there, the brain goes, do you understand the psychology? The brain goes, if they removed coffee from Rome, that must be because Rome is so valuable. So people would then change their decision and rather go to Rome without without coffee because they assume that that's now a bargain purely because of the other two options. And that's happening all the time. And if you want to understand a deeper level why the brain uses context as a way to make value, to understand value, is because we don't have a lot of cognitive resource we can allocate to decision making. If you think back to being on the Serengeti, a lion's running towards you, you have to make quick decisions based on patterns and context. You can't think through everything in life. The brain would be too overwhelmed. So we make these snap decisions based on context.
Which is why you decide on the house you want next quicker than the next pair of jeans you want.
100%. It's crazy, isn't it?
Because the higher the stakes, the more your natural intuition you deploy, and your intuition is the most useful, because it's your own inner exam results of all your experiences.